Last time, a small clade of microbes caused a mass extinction event. After the smoke cleared from this event, some larger organisms began to move into Primin B's intertidal zones. Today, we will explore life in Primin B's freshwater ecosystems and even life on land. Before we can begin discussing life on land, we need to discuss the climate on the surface of Primin B. This map shows Primin B's only continent, Enanus. Within the landmass, there are 5 colored sections. These are called cratons, and they are ancient pieces of continental crust. The black line on this map represents the most notable mountain range on the planet. This map shows the average temperature based on latitude. Using this and landforms that we know of, we can estimate the types of environments that can form. Now, I'm not a great meteorologist, so I'll accept the fact that this next map may not be very accurate. This final map is more based on temperature and humidity. Areas closer to the coasts tend to be more humid. For this map, we are assuming that the westerly winds, which are winds blowing from west to east, tend to prevail in determining where the clouds move. This could be based on Coriolis forces and pressure differences. This should provide more moisture to lands in the west that gradually gets drier as it moves east. The mountain range may stop the clouds from moving at all, which may lead to the formation of a desert on its east side. Currently, the only organisms that live entirely on land are protofolia and rhamophytes. Before any fauna permanently move to land, these clades will have a chance to diversify. Rhamophytes are already prepared to do this. As foliage begins to grow more densely, the need to compete for light will grow. Some rhamophyte clades will compete by growing taller. If a plant is taller than all of the other plants around it, it has more access to sunlight. This organism may grow to the size of earth trees. Since growing to such large sizes requires a lot of time and energy, it may be beneficial for this clade to invest more into a K-type selection strategy. Each branch of this organism may develop a reproductive surface on the end. The asexual spores of ancestral rhamophytes became much more like male sex cells. The ends of this clade's branches contain surfaces that can capture the male gametes. When this happens, the surface produces a female sex cell. When these cells meet, chemical signals make the leaf on the branch fall off and the branch begins to bear a seed. These seeds are larger and more resilient than the ancestral rhamophyte spores. These organisms are called duraspores, and they appeared 5.438 billion years ago. With the arrival of duraspores, more flora began growing on land, especially in the wetlands. In these wetlands, taller plants may shade the shallow water. In shaded waters, Aurea stipula struggle to gather sunlight. One wetland clade of Aurea stipula adapted to collect as much light as possible in this situation. While remaining rooted in the detritus, this clade stem grows to just above the waterline. The shape of its leaf also changed. Instead of growing along the sides of the whole stem, this clade's leaves only grow at the top of the plant, parallel with the waterline. These lily pad-shaped leaves allow a larger surface area to be exposed to the reduced sunlight in shady swamps. This clade is called Mensophyta and it appeared 5.435 billion years ago. In areas with high humidity and fertile soil, one clade of duraspores is able to grow even larger. This will cause steep competition, which will encourage these duraspores to absorb as much light as possible. This clade takes an extra step by producing darker photosynthetic pigments that absorb more light. Water may condense and accumulate on the leaves of these duraspores. This can block gases from entering openings in leaf cells that allow for respiration, effectively smothering the leaves. This can also increase the weight of the branch, causing it to break off of the main organism. This clade may solve this by changing the shape of its leaves. The formation of a drip tip may allow the water to drip off the leaf before it can cause any damage. These tropical duraspores are called acutifolia, and they appeared 5.432 billion years ago. Most photosynthetic life on Primin B uses orange pigments because they match the pink wavelength of the light emitted by the solar system star. Matching the star's peak wavelength helps protect the organism from absorbing too much radiation, which can damage cells. Green plants use the same strategy on Earth. Our sun has a peak wavelength that falls within the green part of the visible light spectrum. Plants could theoretically use pigments that are the complementary color to their star's peak wavelength to absorb more energy, but it would also expose them to more damaging radiation. One clade of ramophytes found a way to make this strategy work though. This clade produces a pigment called anthocyanin, which is usually blue or purple and can absorb Primin's pink orange light. Being able to absorb such a large amount of radiation from Primin B's sun would surely fry the plant if it were in, say, a desert. But in the shade of a tropical forest where plants are fighting over what little light there is, the ability to absorb so much more light may allow it to grow with ease. This new clade is called Umbrophyta, or shadow plant, and it appeared 5.43 billion years ago. Some orange clades of flora still manage to find energy in the shade of the tropical forests, such as one clade of protofolia that adapted for saprotrophy. Saprotrophs are organisms that receive their energy by digesting dead organic matter. Earth saprotrophs include mushrooms, mold, and some bacteria. Since this clade does not rely on photosynthesis as much, its leaf became vestigial. This caused the leaf to reduce in size and lose some of its pigmentation. This clade has large root systems that allow it to find as much organic matter as possible. These decomposers are called putratics, and they appeared 5.429 billion years ago. In temperate biomes, duraspores, ramophytes, and protofolia may be able to grow with some success, but the protofolia in these areas adapted to be more grass-like. One clade stalk forms into more of a bulb, with rows of leaflets appearing above the surface. This protects the plants from winds that may be prevalent on flat land. From the roots of this clade, new bulbs can form. This allows this clade to be able to reproduce through budding as well as releasing spores. This clade of protofolia will make up the majority of the biomass in temperate flatlands. It is called Leptophyta and it appeared 5.427 billion years ago. There is far less biomass in the desert on Primin B. This is because living things like water, which is not very famously associated with deserts. One clade of ramophytes managed to adapt to desert conditions. This clade has thicker leaves and a thinner stem that reduces the organism's surface area to mass ratio. This limits how much radiation from the sun the plant absorbs from all tissues except from its leaves. To protect its spores from drying out, a waxy substance is secreted onto this plant's gametangium and coats the spores. The root system of this clade goes deep into the soil rather than spreading out. These desert ramophytes are called charaspores, and they appeared 5.424 billion years ago. With flora completely covering the land, fauna can begin to follow. But before fauna permanently take the move to land, some clades may move to fresh water. Taking the time to map out all the rivers and lakes of Primin B would be too arduous and time-consuming. So for the sake of the series, we will be assuming that all freshwater ecosystems are pretty similar to each other. The first organisms to live in freshwater are likely unicellular or very small multicellular clades of aureosomes. These clades provide enough energy for some new clades of zooplankton to move into the freshwater. One clade of infirmopods takes up this niche. This clade shell is reduced so much that they are semi-transparent. An organ inside of this clade can hold a small amount of air or water. They can use this organ to control their buoyancy. This clade is called Erysippus and it began eating freshwater algae 5.421 billion years ago. Some ovibrachids managed to form populations in freshwater ecosystems with gentle currents. One small clade of these ovibrachids are highly R-type selective. This clade passively feeds on aureosomes and some Erysippus. This clade only grows to a few millimeters and has proportionally short arms. They are called campanosomes and they appeared 5.42 billion years ago. With a growing population of small organisms in freshwater, some filtroverms may follow. One clade reaches a much smaller maximum size with a thinner body shape. At first, this clade will be gray like their ancestors, but this will later change as they are followed by predators. As predators move in, these filtroverms will begin producing melanin, a brown pigment that allows them to blend into the muddy water. These brown filtroverms are called Lutumpellus, and they appeared 5.418 billion years ago. If you remember from last episode, Detritifragus is a new clade that consumes dead organic matter. One important feature of this clade is that it must stay wet in order to respirate. For this reason, many of them will likely thrive in the mud around rivers. One clade of platyventral will adapt to feed on these Detritifhagus. This clade has a wide, rhombus-shaped body with two pronounced fins that allow them to crawl on the river bottom. This clade lives similarly to other platyventral clades, probing around the mud to find prey. The camouflage of this clade shifted from the sandy appearance to look more like mud. This clade is called Rhombosoma, and it appeared 5.417 billion years ago. Some specialized monodonts found their way into fresh water. This clade is made of lean muscular tissues, which paired with subcarangiform swimming, gives this clade the ability to swim against strong currents that may form in rivers. This clade's tooth has serrations on it that help shred the tissues of prey creatures. It can move its tooth thanks to specially shaped muscles around its mouth. It can make its tooth do partial rotations back and forth, but not full rotations. Think less like a power drill and more like a gory electric toothbrush. Since Primin B shows seasonal change, this clade develops a seasonal cycle. Rivers and lakes are a safe place for this clade to lay its eggs, but there isn't enough food in these habitats to sustain a constant population of this clade. This forces them to migrate between seasons. At the end of the cold winter-like season, this clade swims upstream rivers to spawn. As the warm summer-like seasons arrive though, this clade ends its spawning season and returns to the ocean. This clade is called Ceratodonta and it appeared 5.415 billion years ago. As those of you with some knowledge of evolution on Earth may know, crabs are truly the perfect form. This is because the crab body plan is so versatile that some clades of crustaceans unrelated to crabs often convergently evolved to resemble crabs. Some examples of this are king crabs, hermit crabs, and porcelain crabs. None of these clades belong to the original group of true crabs, but are imposters who copied the crab's homework. This phenomenon, where non-crab species evolve to resemble crabs, is called carcinization. One clade of latipods exhibits carcinization. This clade is much smaller, with the crab's iconic, chonky body shape. This clade's feeding arms are longer, and while they don't exhibit claws, they can be used to pinch a piece of food and bring it to the mouth. These crab imposters, which are older than the planet that true crabs evolved on, are called carsopods. They appeared 5.412 billion years ago. Some clades of pulvinopods adapted to live their whole lives on land in moist areas, like the wetlands or tropical forests. Their foot grew larger and formed a cusp. This cusp, along with some mucousy discharge from an excretory organ, allowed these pulvinopods to climb up smooth surfaces. This clade spawns by laying hundreds of eggs at a time in mud or other wet areas. These land pulvinopods are called latipods, and they appeared 5.409 billion years ago. Latipods are currently the largest predators on land. While they are able to eat any lightly armored clade, any clade with a properly protective shell, such as latipods, will stop their jaws. One clade of latipods adapted to feed on such clades by undergoing centaurism. Centaurism, as beautifully described by Biblioridian, is when a species adapts by using its frontmost pairs of limbs for a purpose besides walking, usually by raising them. This clade's frontmost pair of walking limbs act as short arms that can be used to flip prey over and potentially expose softer tissues. These new predators are called carphostomes, and they appeared 5.407 billion years ago. Some small R-type selecting latipods see dramatic changes to their physiology. These smaller clades have a diet of primarily foliage. Spending more time on or around foliage encouraged this clade to develop an additional protrusion at the bottom of their feet, making a type of claw on each leg. These claws can be used to get a better grip by digging into the stems of Primin B's alien plants. This group of clades will be called the scanderpods, and they appeared 5.406 billion years ago. Some somopsids take up a niche of scavenging for dead land fauna. This clade is already disadvantaged with moving around on land, so they won't take up any kind of predatory niche. A reduction in shell size may help this clade move easier. A thin cusp also formed around the base of this clade's eyeballs. To keep their eyes from dehydrating, this clade can recede their eyes into the stalks to moisten and clean them, similar to the blinking of earth animals. Some populations may even alternate which eyes are open and closed on different intervals. This clade's underside also has teeth made of the same hard material as their shell. They use these teeth to grind down dead organic matter. Then, in a very unsettling fashion, two prehensile mouthparts ingest the masticated food. These funky creatures are called the pterostomes. They appeared 5.404 billion years ago. If paraxopods want to transition to live fully on land, they will need to develop a better form of locomotion. Instead of dragging itself with four fins, one clade may have more foot-like appendages and raise its body off the ground. To support this, some cartilaginous tissues from these paraxopods will harden into lightweight bones that support the legs and back. This clade will feed on carsopods around beaches and scanderopods further inland. But just because this clade has improved mobility doesn't mean that it has good mobility. This clade still moves pretty slowly for a creature with legs, but it will adapt to overcome this once the right pressures come into place. This clade has a flap on its posterior end that resembles a tail, but this is just vestigial leftovers from Platyventra's fin. These slow movers are called tardipods, and they appeared 5.403 billion years ago. These organisms introduced today will lay the foundation for the future of life on land on Primin B. Over the next 300 million years, we will watch how this life evolves as the supercontinent of Enonis drifts apart. Then, it will be time to move on to other worlds. But 300 million years is a long time, and it will take quite a few more episodes to get there. Next time, we will see how all this new land fauna adapts to different climate zones on Enonis. Now enjoy some royalty-free tunes, and check out these art credits.